Hey gang, Jane here with another installment of my color journal. Today, I'm exploring a soft and subtle color palette, and I've got 6 squares to share with you. For today's session, I'm leaning towards lighter hues with gentle pastels. There are 2 versions here, one with a focus on the blue greens and one with a focus on soft greens accented by hints of pink and gold. These palettes can also be mixed up and work nicely in any combination together. Keeping within a cohesive color range can really spark ideas for mixing and matching squares. Perfect for creating a blanket. And yes, mixing and matching squares is definitely on my list for future tutorials. Once we've had a look at today's colorways, I'll introduce you to a simple yet invaluable tool I use during my square making process, a basic kitchen scale. It's incredibly helpful for tracking yarn quantities, and I'll share how I use it a bit later. Ready to dive in? Let's get started on today's squares. So we'll start with our first square, and that's the daisy. And the daisy is done in a very soft, nice pastel color palette. We have 4 colors going on here. The first one is Soft Taupe by Impeccable, a nice light beige. The second one is a nice bright white by Red Heart Super Saver. The third one is a Frosty Green by Red Heart Super Saver, and that's a nice soft pastel-y green. And the final one is Putty by Impeccable, just a little off from the white itself. Now the order of the colors, we start with our center, which is the nice soft taupe, so that really pops out. Then we surround that with a petal of white flower, which is round 2. Round 3, we go to the Frosty Green, and you might not be able to see it in there, but it just gives a nice little border to it before we go to the next set of petals, which will be done in the putty color on round 4. Then round 5, we frame and square up our piece with the Frosty Green. And then round 6, 7, and 8 are all border rounds done in single crochet chain 1 style. We have round 6 with the soft taupe, round 7 going to the bright white, and round 8 going to the Frosty Green, and those pull all the colors from the square out to the border. Our second square is the Wispy Willow, one of my favorites, and that's just done in 3 colors. A very simple palette, and it stays with the bluey green tones. So the first color is called Green Lagoon by Impeccable. The second color is Winter White by Bernat Super Value, so that's a soft white. And the third color is this Frosty Green by Red Heart Super Saver, and it is a nice pale light minty green. The order of this square is you're only working with 3 colors, so you start in the center with the Green Lagoon, which gives it a nice pop for your center. And then we go to round 2, which is our petals, and we go straight to the Winter White. So you create that nice white flower in the center. Then we frame that with the Frosty Green in round 3. Round 4 is just a very thin border all the way around, so we do it in the Green Lagoon to mirror the center. And then in round 5, it's also somewhat of a border, but we have some chain stitches in there, and we do that in the Winter White. What we're doing here is setting up between the 2 shades of green. So then we're moving out to round 6, which is where we square this piece, and that's done in the nice Frosty Green. Then we move to round 7, which kind of mirrors round 6, again squaring out, and that's done in the Green Lagoon. So we have the 2 greens creating that square frame. And then we have rounds 8, 9, and 10 again, which are border rounds. So round 8 is done in the Winter White, round 9 is done in the Frosty Green, and round 10, the final one, we bring back the center of our square and we make it Green Lagoon. I love doing squares where I do the borders, usually anywhere from 2 or 3 rounds. Sometimes I go as far as 4, and I like to bring all the colors that are in the square out to frame the border. Moving on to our next piece, it's going to be Rosalie, and she is a beautiful little hexagon, and she again is done in the same color palette as the previous one. So we only have 3 colors. Our first color is the Winter White by Bernat Super Value. The next color is Frosty Green, Red Heart Super Saver, and the third color is the Green Lagoon by Impeccable. Now we just have them in a different order here. Now the order of the colors, starting with the Winter White. So we have a nice little white center in the middle of our flower. Then we move on to the Frosty Green in round 2. And then round 3, we go back to the Winter White. There's not a lot of solid color going on there. And then we move on to round 4, which is done in the Green Lagoon. So round 3 gives a little break between the 2 greens. Round 5, we go back again to the Winter White, and that frames our petals. Round 6, we're going to Frosty Green for another set of petals. And then round 7, we go back to the white again to frame those petals. Moving on to round 8, we're going to the green lagoon. So we're going back and forth between the two greens with whites in between. So round 9 is the winter white, and round 10 finishes it off with the frosty green color. So we ended with a lighter color on this one. The next piece we have is a simple hexagon. This blossom is a beautiful, simple little square to work on, and we've changed up our color scheme. We've added in some pink and taken out that deep green. So we start with our primrose color. That's by Bernat Super Value, a nice light pink. Then we have frosty green again by Red Heart Super Saver. And finally, we have that white by Red Heart Super Saver, a nice bright white. So the order for this one is we start with our primrose. So we have a very small little center in this one, which is the single crochets, and we start with the pink. Then our center grows, so we use the frosty green for round 2. Then in round 3, we have our official petals for the flower. So they're going to be done in the nice white color. Then we move back to the primrose in round 4. What we've done there is that's where we've created the hexagon, because before that it was just a circle with the flower. Then in round 5 we go to the frosty green, and then we're left with round 6 and 7 as the border rounds. So I bring back in the white, and then we finish off on round 7 with the primrose. That mirrors this very center of our flower. You'll see I do that a lot with my flowers. Whatever I have in the center often becomes the final round of the piece. It just kind of gives me this sense of completion. Whatever I started with, that's what I end with. Not always, but it does give it a nice look. The next 2 squares are both going to be the Mandala Square or Mandala Square, and they are both done in a version of the same colors. So this first one is done in 5 colors. The first color being Primrose by Bernat Super Value. The second color being Winter White by Bernat Super Value. The third color is Sphagnum by Impeccable, and that's that golden green. And the fourth color is Honey by Bernat Super Value, so also brings the gold color in. And finally we have Parchment by Bernat Premium. The order of these are we start with the Primrose, so we have a nice soft center, and then on round 2 we go to the Winter White. So it kind of looks like petals. It's not a solid round. It's got a lot of chain stitches in it, but it actually creates this look of petals, and the white really makes it pop. So on round 3, we go to the Sphagnum, so it looks like it's just framing that nice little flower in the center. And then round 4, we do a border with the honey color. So we've created kind of a nice little flower in the middle of a framed piece. Now on round 5, we move back to some more petals, and I go to the Winter White for that. And it creates an outside flower that mirrors the inside flower. Then in round 6, we do a nice green border to emphasize the white petals. And in round 7, we go back to the primrose to create a frame. And then in round 8, we frame that frame with the honey color. That's the end of the 8-shaped piece. So round 9 and 10 become the squaring rounds, and I wanted to do them in something different than what the flower was done in, so the flower really pops. So I introduced another color, and that's Parchment by Bernat Premium. Those 2 rounds work together to give us a final frame to this octagon piece. So the last square is also the Mandala Square, and the colors are very similar. And in this case, we've added one more color, so we have 6 colors that we're working with. The first one's Frosty Green by Red Heart Super Saver. Then we have Winter White by Bernat Super Value, nice soft white. Then we have Primrose by Bernat Super Value. And again, we have the Sphagnum by Impeccable, that nice golden green. Then we have Parchment by Bernat Premium. And we have our final color is Honey, again, a golden color, Bernat Super Value. So the order of these colors, we're going to start this one with the frosty green in the center, and then we move to the second round, which is Winter White, and then in the third round we have the primrose color, the nice soft pink, and that kind of creates your flower, a little bit different than the one before. Then we move on to round number 4, and we frame it with the Sphagnum. Now in round 5, we're doing our petals in Parchment this time. So we're staying with a white, but we're not using the Winter White. Then in round 6, we go to the golden color to frame those petals, which is the Honey. Now in round 7, we go back to the Sphagnum to frame our flower. In round 8, we go back to the Winter White to frame that part of the octagon. 9 and 10 again are squaring rounds, so they create the frame. They're often done in the same color because they create the square, and I did them in the frosty green. So if you look at these two squares, the one we did before this one and this one, they would work really nice together in a project. So I'd mentioned at the beginning that I was going to share another one of my tools I use to help me create my squares. One question I receive often is how I determine how much yarn to use in a project and how to know how much of each color a single square takes. This little scale is one of the handiest things I've ever picked up. It's a simple kitchen scale, so it's able to do small increments in weight. I just picked this up on Amazon. They're easy to find and they're inexpensive. It has different units available to use, but I use the grams for my yarn. I can weigh individual squares, multiple squares, or even a full project. I like to use it to determine how much yarn one square will take, and then I can multiply it by the number of squares I need to finish my project. Usually I use multiple colors in my squares, so if I feel there's more of one color than another color, I can rip out a completed square and weigh each color individually if I want to be super accurate. If I need to weigh larger items such as stacks of squares that don't fit on the scale or blankets or sweaters, I can use a container and just zero out the scale with the empty container on it. Now I have a much bigger container where I can weigh out blankets and or sweaters. This is just a little introduction tip. I'm going to do a much more in-depth tutorial on how I use my scale for an actual project in the near future. So I can walk you through the steps I use to determine yarn quantities with the help of this handy little scale. I hope this inspires you to work with color and play around making new project ideas of your own. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please give it a like and remember to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any of my tutorials as they come out. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I'll see you in the next tutorial.